recording. So here we go. And again, I know a couple people just joined us. If you can please look to the chat to sign in, we greatly appreciate it. It's our record that you're here. And inspirational words to get us started. Love me some RBG. We will all profit from a more diverse, inclusive society, understanding, accommodating, even celebrating our differences while pulling together for the common good. I love that saying. And so you're here because we're all going to learn a little bit. This is the Diversity and Inclusion 101. This is Friday, February 3rd. And I am going to have my director, Sylvia, introduce Danielle Johnson. She is going to be our conversation catalyst for the next 6 weeks. So Sylvia.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning and welcome, everybody. We're so excited to kick off our second round of DEI workshops that are being brought by Danielle and Best Start to the Antelope Valley. Just a little bit about our good friend, Danielle. Danielle Johnson lives by the mantra, think, speak, and act for yourself and your community. Danielle is the executive director of Wichita Habitat for Humanity and a majority owner of Inclusive Growth Strategies, a diversity, inclusion, and equity consulting business. She prides herself on being an affordable housing advocate, conversation catalyst, inclusion and diversity educator, community mobilizer, and super volunteer. Danielle is a product of USD 259 Public Schools, a two-time Wichita State University shocker with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in public administration. Danielle is no stranger to board, committee, and community service, as she's currently serving at the following boards: Community Operations Recovery Empowerment, Inc., Wichita Urban Professionals, Rise Up for Youth, Wichita Branch NAACP, Health Core Clinic, Leadership, and Leadership Wichita. Danielle has taken courses with Advanced Kansas Class 6, Kansas Leadership Center, Young Professionals of Wichita Leadership Academy, a Leadership Wichita. Danielle and her spouse, District 1 Councilman Brandon Johnson, are the proud parents of 3 children, ages 17, 8, and 3. Danielle has extensive nonprofit and community engagement experience. Danielle sees the importance of representation and pushes to move the needle in the spaces she's in. Ultimately, what drives Danielle is her passion for our community as a whole, without ever forgetting that community is made up of individuals coming together. And we are so pleased to have Danielle. Like I said, this is the second round of DEI workshops that are being provided. And we are super excited. Our last one really reached out to over 700 residents and partners in the Antelope Valley. So we're hoping to do the same thing. And just like Tracy said earlier, we're looking to add to all our tool cases with tools and skills to be able to have either the difficult conversations within our communities or just really just become more aware of the tools that we can use. So again, help me welcome Danielle Johnson to the AV today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to make sure that everyone can hear me. So if you have any issues, please let me know, drop it in the box. Thank you again for that warm welcome. Listening to a bio was kind of odd, right? So while there's a lot of work there, I'm sure many of you all have an extensive background as well in the work. And I like to approach this as a large group discussion and engagement where I'm going to be sharing some information with you. And I look forward to engaging and hearing from you all as well. There are a lot of you on the screen now, so be patient with me. So if there are questions or concerns, my Best Start team, make sure that we're checking the chat and keep me in check here. Like it was shared, my name is Danielle Johnson. I have the pleasure of being your conversation catalyst today. And that term from my vantage point means being an event or person that causes great change. That's something that is important in this work, because when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a lot of work and ground to still be covered, and there's a lot of history that informs that work. So as we move forward, and I already see this going on in the chat, if you want to use the chat to just share where you are from, feel free. I'm seeing some different things dropped in here. There's a lot of us, so we couldn't hear from everyone in their backgrounds. However, if you want to share a little bit in the chat, you're more than welcome to do so. We have a pretty aggressive timeline today. This is a 101. So I want to hit as many things as we possibly can, and I will be cognizant of time. We're going to have a co-create the space, little icebreaker for you all to engage with one another. We'll do some 101. So common language, how we make D&I a priority, the organizational impacts of diversity, equity, inclusion. We'll get into a little bit of social identities, microaggression, privilege and oppression, and end with some action steps. My hope, though, is that you continue to pull some tangible things that you can do within your personal life, your organizations, wherever you serve, and be able to use some of these DEI tips and tricks in the work that you're doing. I do see some familiar faces. So for some of you, this may be a refresher. I love to see the continuing folks coming back to these sessions, because we do have to continue to lean into learning, and then we will save some time for some Q&A. At this point, I want us to engage an intentional relationship in order to make something together, right? That's co-creating the space. Anytime you get into these dialogues, there are going to be folks that agree or disagree, or we're going to be coming from DEI from a total different lens. I'm hailing from Wichita, Kansas. That's going to look a little bit different than where you all are. And so I want to make sure that we are engaging in the understanding that we're co-creating this space this morning. And just ensure that we want to make sure that we're looking this as a learning environment. And so again, we want to be open-minded as we move forward. This will help to set the tone, as you all will be in some breakout sessions. So please be mindful of these conversational expectations. There'll be opportunities to chime in the larger group, but we want to operate with the facilitator reserving the right to halt discussion and maintain order. I've been in a number of discussions with folks that are adamantly opposed to one another. And what's been helpful is that respect continues to be at the center of those discussions. Be present and respect the space. If you can join us on camera, I know maybe not everyone is in an ideal space, but if you are, I would like to invite you to be on camera with us today, just so we can get to know each other a little bit and see one another's faces. We want to lean into the conversation today, lean into the discussions that you'll have in your breakout groups, and feel free again to utilize the chat as we move forward. One mic, one person speak at a time. We got to use our Zoom functions because we are a packed family today. Land the plane. My hope is that we want to enter into this space with understanding and grace. So please feel free to ask your question, say your comment, but when we do that, we want to assume good intent in this space. I don't know how many folks know each other or not, but we want to make sure that as we dialogue with one another today, that we are assuming good intent. And then also understanding within that, freedom of speech is not freedom from consequence. You still may step in it, you still may offend. And in doing so, an apology and a commitment to changing how you treat others is going to be important, or how you learn and be mindful of the words that you're using. And as we move forward, stories stay, lessons leave. You may have an opportunity to share a little bit more about your background and who you are. I ask that we walk away with the principles that we can learn from one another, versus leaving with stories as gossip. So those are just a couple of conversational expectations. Please feel free to utilize those in the continued conversations that you all are having, right? This is an hour-and-a-half session. So you're gonna absorb some information, but it's what you do after you leave these sessions over these next couple of weeks. It's what's actually gonna create the change. So how are you implementing all of the things that you are learning? I also want us to take some time to lean into mindfulness. Some folks think that that's a new trend, and it is not, right? Mindfulness is some of the most earliest and oldest teachings that we have amongst us. And that's just being present, right? You could maybe some of you all are breathing gurus and you're taking full time to unplug and do all of those pieces. We don't have time for that today, but what we can do is set our mindset and be as grounded as we possibly can in this space. So whatever you need to do to quiet the things around you, maybe turn off the extra dings, maybe minimize the 4 other screens you got going right now, get off the email and be as present as you possibly can. It can be hard, especially if we're caregivers or we're working remotely. There may be a lot going on behind you, but let's be as mindful and as present as we can. And let's be reflective. I am a lover of Maya Angelou, and she shares a quote, "In diversity, there is beauty and there is strength." So it's important for us to kind of just be in the mindset of embracing diversity. Sometimes diversity, equity, and inclusion can breed a space where folks become tense or feel like they have to be combative in the conversation. I ask that we lean into this discussion with an open mind and open heart so we can move forward. We're going to gear up for our first breakout group, and some of the questions, my apologies, that you will be reviewing in your breakout group is, what apprehensions, if any, do you have in engaging in D&I topics? So for example, maybe saying something offensive, not feeling like you're allowed to be a part of the discussion. The second question is, how do you see diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives benefiting you and your organization? As you all have that conversation, if you can maybe identify one person that would report out to the group. We're not going to be able to hear from every group, but I would like to have some idea of what you all discussed. This will be about a 6-minute discussion, so please be mindful of the conversational expectations. I did drop these questions in the chat. You'll be briefly in your breakout room, so just kind of share and let's get warmed up today. What are our apprehensions? And how do we see this benefiting the work that we're doing personally and in groups? If Stephanie, if you want to go ahead and put us in breakouts, that would be great. All right.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you all for coming back. I hope you all were able to have some discussion. If I can hear from maybe 1 or 2 groups, and if you want to just do the raise your hand function, that might be a little bit easier. And then we can go from there. Just kind of share what you all talked about. And with 200 some odd people, I know there can't be, not everyone on the screen is shy. There's just,
I can share.
the odds are not in that favor. Thank you, go ahead.
One thing I didn't specifically talk about my personal apprehension is, but I stated that, you know, everybody has a different type of personality. You know, some are introverted, some are extroverted. So for someone that's introverted, it makes it so much more difficult to kind of voice your opinion or what your feelings may be, in comparison to someone that is more extroverted and they're able to do those things. So I guess I could say that that is probably one of my apprehensions, because at times I could be very introverted and other times I could be very extroverted.
Right. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
Danielle, we had Nicole raise her hand and then kind-hearted Keisha.
Thank you. Go ahead, Nicole.
I love kind-hearted Keisha. That's a beautiful name.
too.
So with my group, we were discussing some of the apprehensions that we had with this, you know, difficult topic, and a few of the things, the themes that we had come up with as being heard. You know, that was of importance, coming to a middle ground, being able to understand where both sides are coming from, and being able to have that middle of the road, if you will, to understand where both parties are coming from. And then we also had fear of unintentionally offending someone, you know, and getting the language so that doesn't happen. Those were some of our apprehensions.
Thank you for that, Nicole.
Absolutely, thank you.
Lakeisha.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that my name was still there from the last ABB meeting that I facilitated. I'm like, what are they calling me kind-hearted Keisha for?
I love it though.
Thank you. So what we took from the group is that like share the space and don't over talk, and one of us had mentioned not knowing enough and not feeling like what we bring to the table is like valuable or worth it, like, and especially like when dealing with higher people up and sitting at the table with them, just second guessing ourselves, like, do what we know, is it valuable enough, like is it important enough? So that's some of the stuff that we was talking about, but the 5 minutes went by really quick, so we didn't have too much time to get into the second question. We talked about it maybe for about 1 minute.
Okay. Thank you for that. And thank you all for your patience in advance. We got a lot of information and ground to cover this morning. So all of those things are valid, right? If you've ever said something and got cussed out, yelled out, labeled something inadvertently, that's going to keep you from getting into this discussion, questioning yourself. How much do I know about this topic, right? That can color how you engage. What is important to know is that we are engaging in this topic and bringing our wealth of own experiences and knowledge to the discussion, while also engaging. Again, you're going to hear me say this a lot. Grace goes a long way. Understanding goes a long way. And knowing that not everyone knows everything, right? We have varying experiences, and that's going to color how we move forward with D&I. That being said, this will be more of a reflective. So I want you all to kind of reflect on your backgrounds, the shoulders of folks that you stand on, those shoulders of giants, if you will. When you think about your life, who has lifted you up? What are some of the sacrifices that were made for you to be where you are today? Who are the folks that have mentored you? Who are some of the folks that have modeled the way for you? And where do you draw your strength, persistence, and goal seeking from? So thinking about whose shoulders do you stand on, and how you respond to those questions shapes how you engage in DEI. So just to be candid about a little bit about my background, you heard a little bit about the bio, but there's things about me, right, that you don't know, that you can't just visibly see. So I stand on the shoulders of both my mom and dad. They mean the world to me. So Marta and Larry Andrews. My mother hails from Pampanga, Philippines. She's someone that cleaned hotels, worked in various manufacturing companies, really had to push through to make a way, had a 3rd grade education, but instilled in me the importance of getting my own education and the pride and privilege of the fact that I was born in Wichita, Kansas as a citizen. My mom is not a citizen. She continues to be a citizen of the Philippines. She has all her documentation, but has prided herself on being a Filipino citizen. So pushing me to continue to move forward in this country to be able to get the things I needed to get done is something that she prides herself on. My dad comes from Birmingham, Alabama. He was someone that made sure that I knew my roots before the school system had an opportunity to tell me anything. And so that is something that he has prided himself on, coming up from a lot of the remnants of the civil rights movement in Birmingham. He has a degree from Dillard University, which is a historically Black college or university in New Orleans. And so both, again, instilled the importance of leadership. He made sure that I was with him when he was delivering Meals on Wheels and doing all of the service-oriented servant leadership pieces. And so that's where my growth and love and affinity for DEI work and working with people comes from. And that shapes how I engage with folks, this multicultural background, my particular lens. We're not going to break out on this one, but I do want you all just to kind of think of your own stories. What are the pieces and places, the things that shape you, what keeps you moving forward and what keeps you motivated? You would find that if we had this conversation, that there's a lot of, and maybe even from my story, you all have similar experiences with your caregivers or yourself, right? The educational attainment, or maybe the barriers to that attainment, and how you identify or how your family identifies. So we're going to get into this 101, some of the more tangible pieces when we talk about common language. I've said a couple of these things, but I want us to all work from the same framework. You may have your own definitions, but I ask that in this space, we're using the following definitions. Lots of acronyms get thrown around. So you hear DEI, IND. Oftentimes the D is in diversity, right? I, inclusion, and E, we're starting to see creep in more often, is the equity piece. Equity, some folks use equality. I lean more into the equity side of the conversation. Belonging is continuing to come up in discussions now when you're talking diversity, equity, and inclusion. So belonging referring to a human's emotional need to feel secure and supported, a sense of acceptance and opportunity to affiliate with members of a group. Maybe you're looking for belonging in your own organizations, places of worship, whatever that might be looking for, but we are all looking for a place to call our own, a space where we are fully accepted. Diversity being the unique range of human differences. I like to use the term facets. So including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender expression, political beliefs, national origin, value systems. I believe that diversity always exists, just by very definition. This screen is incredibly diverse. You may be missing a facet. So when you think about your organization, what are those facets that you may be missing? Are you majorly woman-centered organization? Are you a majority male-centered organization? Do you skew very young? Do you skew a little bit more seasoned? Right? You may have a facet that you're needing to lean into that might not exist, but diversity within itself always exists. Inclusion does not always exist. So the involvement and empowerment where the inherent worth and dignity of all people are recognized and valued. That's something that has to actively be worked on, right? You have to put things in place for there to be inclusion and belonging. And then systemic, relating to or affecting the whole of a systems. Organizations oftentimes are a system, an ecosystem, if you will. Things are systemic. And there are things that travel from our history and policies and procedures that provide systemic barriers to access. So culture is systemic. Systemic theory systems are interrelated, interconnected parts that create a whole. There are patterns of behavior deeply rooted in structural systems which are beneath the waterline. So to address the system, one must be able to address the underlying patterns that create that system. Intersectionality, something that we oftentimes hear, and maybe you all have not, an understanding that describes the ways that systems of inequality based on identities, or those facets, like I shared earlier, gender, race, ethnicity, social class, religion, orientation, what have you, overlap or intersect to create unique dynamics and effects with one another, right? We are all intersectional beings. We're not just one thing, although sometimes folks see us and try to put us in a box. That actual term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. If you're looking to learn more about that amazing legal scholar, please don't hesitate. Google will take you a long way with Kimberly Crenshaw. She has an amazing TED Talk on intersectionality. I encourage you all to check her out. Equality and equity. These two are not interchangeable words. These are two different concepts. Equality is the same in quality, measure, esteem, or value, providing the exact same resources, treating everyone exactly the same. Equity is referring to fairness and justice and is distinguished from equality, whereas equality means providing the same to all. Equity means recognizing that we do not all start from the same place, and we acknowledge the adjustments and imbalances that may exist. So I do have a graphic. I'm sure many of us have seen a multitude of these graphics if you're in DEI work. I prefer this one because it showcases quite plainly what equality and equity looks like, right? On that first picture, you have 3 people, all of which are being treated equally. They've been given a box. Not everyone can use that box. The first gentleman or person doesn't need the box. The second one needs a little bit more to help get over that fence. And the third person can't use that box at all, right? On that photo beside it, you see equity happening. Again, first person, no box. Second person needs 2 boxes. Third person has a ramp, right, to meet their needs. Equity states that we're meeting the needs of the person and making sure that they're able to move forward at the same rate that the person next to them are able to move forward. An extra step, liberation or justice, would be that there was no fence. So regardless of where you're at on the spectrum, you would be able to access this game from any vantage point. Some of us would like to call that universal design. How are we ensuring that when anyone comes to this space, they're able to interact with the topic, the class, the space, whatever that may be? And that takes a lot of work to get to equity, right? Sometimes we have political will or policies that keep equity from happening because we're preferencing equality. So think about the work that you're engaged in and the places and spaces that you are inhabiting, and think about, what does your work look like? Are you practicing equity work? Or are you practicing equality work? And what are you allowed to do within your organization when it comes to your work? Other ways to kind of think about DEI is from a dimension standpoint, you being at the center. And then there's these varying rings. So when you think about internally, the internal you and how you identify, and maybe you don't identify with some of these facets, but your age, your national origin, gender, physical ability, disabilities, that external, so your geographic location, experiences, when we think about appearance, citizenship. When you look at the organizational side of DEI and how you engage, what's your function, your status on the job, your tenure, union affiliation, right? These affect how you get to work with DEI policies, procedures, topics, engagement. And then think of the era. Think of the era that you personally grew up in, the era in which your colleagues have grown up in, family members, your friends. So world events, political events, cultural events, historical events, right? This last few years, we've seen a number of things in this lifetime, living through a global pandemic, how that's affect, even think about how as a caregiver, or a mentor how children have interacted with school, right? Some folks were able to plug and play, go home, stay home, and utilize computers because they had the privilege to have access and internet, while some of our areas had no access, right? We still have young people, at least I know some young people that are going to McDonald's parking lots, writing papers on their cell phone because they don't have access to Wi-Fi. That's what we're talking about when we talk about DEI: equity, availability, access. So take a moment for you all just to kind of reflect on what's been shared. Again, feel free to use the chat, or if there's any questions or things you want to share, but just continue to be in that mindful space. Why is D&I a priority? Why is it important, right? Oftentimes people are like, well, it's just the good thing to do. It's just the common good, right? But there's a lot. While it is good, what are we doing to make sure that we're moving the work forward? So when we think about D&I as both a common good and an informed business practice, are we understanding the experiences of our diverse employees and customers, right? And when I say diversity, again, think about those facets, not just race, ethnicity, and gender, right? But the people with disabilities, how are they able to get on the job? Here in Kansas, they're looking to push legislation to ensure that people with disabilities have some preference to getting into the workplace. So how are we ensuring that folks have access at all levels, and not just the blue collar jobs, but what are the different ways for folks to be able to grow in their own generational finance and be self-sufficient within our communities? An inclusive environment minimizes insider versus outsider culture and improves productivity, morale, innovation, and the total quality of your organization. Tracy, were you going to ask me something?
No, we just had in the comments 2 people asking if they are going to be able to get the slides from today.
Yes, there will be slides. Thank you. And then employment, recruitment, and retention. And we're all dealing with labor force issues, right? We have folks that are retiring. We have folks that are trying to enter. We have a multi-generational workforce. We're all looking for folks that are wanting to be in the trade. Doesn't matter where you are, we're experiencing some shortages. So what are we doing to ensure that when folks do come on the job, they want to stay? Because the power is in the retention. Some other statistics for you to consider: companies with more than 30% women executives or women in leadership were more likely to outperform companies where the percentage ranged from 10 to 30. A 2019 McKinsey report on 533 public companies found that those in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity in management were 36 more likely to have financial returns above the industry mean. Companies in top quartile for both gender and ethnic diversity are 12% more likely to outperform other companies in this data set. Diverse teams see a 60% in improvement in decision-making abilities. And then researchers found that strong homogeneous cultures can stifle natural cognitive diversity. Think about the times that you've been in spaces and you felt pressure to conform, right? And there's a difference between just the general rules and regulations you have to follow versus, is my hair going to distract folks? Are the piercings on my face going to keep me from getting this job? If my tattoo is showing, is this going to keep me from being able to get this job? We recently here in Wichita for our police department, they made some changes on being able to have facial hair and tattoos showing, and they were able to hire. So job shortage. And when we think about what you actually need to perform the task, are we preferencing or are we discriminating? Are we keeping people from being able to enter a job field because we have some policies that keep us from being able to recruit from different populations? And we've seen that increase here in our police department from these little tweaks, from the tattoos, the facial piercings, and even to the facial hair. So again, be thinking about the policies and procedures when you think about recruitment. What's happening in your HR departments and what's happening in your handbooks? Are these relevant policies and procedures? Or are we inadvertently keeping people from being able to join us in our jobs or our schools, universities, what have you? Companies who truly value diversity see several business benefits. Again, these are the numbers, McKinsey and Company. And if you're looking for some of those reports, feel free to check out McKinsey and Company. They say 35% greater chance of higher financial returns than their national industry mean. Deloitte, 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee. Harvard Business Journal, more sales revenue, more customers, and greater profits. And again, it's not all about the profits, but it's just good business practice. When we're engaging in DEI, it's one way for us to continue to move our organizations to be a lot more successful. When I think about Coke or Coca-Cola, it's the same across the world. They really try to get in the market of engaging folks across the world because they know they have a product to sell. So whether you're here or you're in the Philippines or you're in California, you can get you a Coke. And they're smart enough to put it in your language, right? So thinking about how that is showing up, I see in the chat, we have started seeing the diversity over the years in medical fields. Absolutely, right? You want someone that understands your cultural background when they're working with you, right? And we're starting to see also the effects, social determinants of health also play a big role on your access to healthcare and how folks treat you in your healthcare medical field, right? You don't want someone that's going to engage in stereotypes when they're working alongside you. What are those organizational impacts? Well, there have been some organizations, not to say that they've gotten it wrong, but they have ran into some legal impacts and legal implications from having some issues around DEI. So Bank of America, $300,000 in a disability discrimination housing case. The little bit about that background, folks with disabilities, folks that have caretakers helping to work alongside them, not being able to get home loans. Johnson & Johnson was sued by an ex-exec who claimed she faced sexist, harassing, and demeaning behavior from male coworkers due to her gender and sexual orientation. Oracle was sued in 2017 by female employees over gender pay disparities. And a court earlier this year opened the class action lawsuit to more than 4,000 other current and former employees. Uber was sued by a driver who claimed the company's 5-star rating system is racially biased. So these are some of the ways in which DEI can impact your organization, whether we agree with these lawsuits or not. There is the EEOC side. We talk about the spirit of diversity, equity, inclusion, and then there's the law and what the law states that you should be doing, particularly when you're working with protected classes. An organizational response to this, Joshua Bolton, who's over the Business Roundtable, and the Business Roundtable is an organization made up of a number of the top CEOs across the country. They're a group that I believe they lead and support about 37 million worth of employees and generate about $10 trillion in sales and economic base to this particular country. And he states this is now a core economic issue for every company in America. Every one of them is hearing from their employees and customers to address racial inequality. All the CEOs recognize that we need to do better. So we're starting to see organizations be more vocal. We're starting to see policies and procedures change. And I'm sure there are no shortage of DEI opportunities that folks are being encouraged to go to because, again, they want to be able to ensure that they're creating spaces where people can actually thrive and move forward and enter into the job market. So Walmart, over the last few years, we saw $100 million over 5 years to create a new center on racial equity, concentrating on financial health care, criminal justice, and education. We saw owners of brands make some changes. Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's. We saw the NFL commissioner, Roger Goodall, reverse the stance on players kneeling. NASCAR banning Confederate flags. We saw Washington Redskins NFL team change. Here locally in Wichita, we've had some mascots change from high schools so that we can be a little bit more informed and not just sensitive, but understanding of the cultures that represent the students that walk the halls of our classroom. So just being mindful in our school buildings of what our school represents. What's the values of your schools? What are the images that are in place that people have to work with and see every day? Is it demoralizing to walk into the classroom, or is there an opportunity to see yourself reflected in your criteria? And there's a number of other examples. So this is just a few, and I'm sure there's some examples that you all have in your communities of ways folks have embraced changes. I like to say it's important for us not to fall into the food fabric fun of DEI. Right, we're going to celebrate Lunar New Year, which we want to celebrate that, but are we educating folks? We want to say that Black Lives Matter is February. We want to say it's time for Black History Month facts, but how are the people in your organizations of these communities being treated? What are your policies and procedures saying? While we do the potlucks and we have the conversations, where are we making sure that we're looking at the practices and that we're engaging with the populations that are diverse in our organizations and they actually feel like we're doing the work and not just posturing? Dr. Cheryl put, this session comes at a perfect time for me. I'm in the process of creating a DEI training session for my organization, and the data points are great. My focus is supplier diversity. That's a perfect point too. Who are we putting our dollars in the hands of, right? From your caterer to your photographer to where you're ordering your items, as there's opportunities to highlight the minority business owners within your community. Where are you ordering? How are we setting those things up? I want to take it a step further as we go into DEI. Again, we don't want to just talk about the spirit and the frill, but we want to talk about some historical context. And when we think about our US history, and that seems to be and continues to be up for debate, it's important for us to root our conversation in fact and historical fact, not to hurt feelings, not to bring guilt. While those things do come up, it's not helpful in this discussion. We need to be mindful and understanding where we come from in our US history, and for those of us that come from different places or different countries, what is our history and what's played out in the past, and how do we understand that so we don't continue to make the same mistakes moving forward. So just a quick piece on around the GI Bill, and while we see some equity gaps today in wealth and in home ownership, the Barnetts weren't the only Black Americans for whom the promise of the GI Bill being when folks were a part of the military and they went off to serve, they were promised a lump sum money to go to school, to get housing, right? Through the bill, though the bill helped white Americans prosper and accumulate wealth in the post-war years, it didn't deliver on that promise for veterans of color. In fact, the wide disparity in the bill's implementation ended up helping to drive growing gaps in wealth, education, and civil rights between white and Black Americans, but not just white and Black Americans, because oftentimes that's kind of what's sold. It's also those that identified as Hispanic, Native Indigenous were also unable to access that GI Bill. So while the GI Bill's language did not specifically exclude people of color, African American veterans from its benefits, it was structured in a way that ultimately shut doors for 1.2 million Black veterans who bravely served in their country. So think about groups of people having access. You've served, you get your check, you're able to sow into a new home and get your education, while a whole other group of folks, generations of people, are affected by this decision to have access to something that could have set them up with the foundation to be successful, and how that just rolls down the generations. An added caveat to that is redlining, and this is where equity and policy come into play, and diversity and equity and inclusion. When you can't access capital, you can't grow wealth, right? And again, history, where I'm not putting, I'm not just trying to create a made up narrative here. These are things that you can research and find and get a good understanding of why we have disparity. So what is this? Food for thought. Redlining. Neighborhoods with minority occupants were marked in red and considered high risk for mortgage lenders. Redlining was carried out by government, banks, realtors, appraisers, entities who worked in tangent to ensure Black and brown people did not have access to home and wealth. And we see that still today when you, again, those facets, people with disabilities getting access to living homes, right? So it's not just exclusive to racial ethnic minorities, but other minoritized identities are experiencing what we like to call a modern day redlining, right? Just quickly for you all to get some opportunities to see, this is kind of a map here and some different spaces around or in your surrounding area of what redlining was. It was the Hulk grading, and there was some color representation, green being this is the best, blue being still desirable, yellow definitely declining, and D or red being hazardous. If you overlay some maps on top of those things today, at least for with us in Wichita, Kansas, we see that those are our food deserts, our highly redlined area, food deserts, high socioeconomic disparities, some of the most disinvested areas in our city. So if you look at that, you'll see kind of similar things within your own community. This is our redlining map, right? I don't want to just talk about what's going on for you all in the Antelope Valley, but what's happening in Wichita. We had a severe redlined city, and we're suffering from those things to this day. Again, 1930s, not that long ago, minorities made up 12% of Wichita's population and received 2% of the home loans. If you drive these communities today, you'll see that disparity still haunting our own community. And this is what the language was when they did those reports. So just a quick snippet for us. D2, the large area contains the Negro concentration of Wichita. In the north and immediately south of the Packing House and Stockyards district are a number of Mexicans. Property in the area is poor, shaky, and typical of Negro properties. This is what you would find in some of your own local documents as well, how people were considered hazardous and how land was being able to be taken. We are the third most redlined city in the US, we being Wichita, Kansas. And that is something that we're actively trying to work through today by moving dollars. So some of our foundations are being mindful about what are the zip codes that have the most need. And that's how equity can work as well. How are you looking at the resources that the organizations, where's the money going in your community? Where should it be going? How could it be supporting your communities? Questions? Okay, we're gonna keep rolling along. I would really ask that you all take some time to understand the history of your own community. What have been some policies and procedures that keep folks from being able to access the resources and tools to be successful? Because as we do DEI work, we would be remiss to not take the time to look back so we can move forward. Because some of those policies still may be on the books, right? We have acts right now, such as the Crown Act. Some states have adopted that being people being able to wear, specifically racial ethnic minorities being able to wear their hair the way it grows out of their head, right? Being able to have your afro, being able to have braids, and being able to still access a job, being able to still get into a space, right? Some of us know keenly what it's like to have to change your hair or change how you speak, right? We call that code switching and covering. That's another session. We don't have time for that. But some of us have to conform for our survival or to be thought of. How often are you in this space where you're the only one in that space? You're the only representation, be it race, ethnicity, maybe you're the youngest. Maybe you're the only open, outwardly identifying LGBTQ plus person. Maybe you're the only Christian, maybe the only atheist, whatever those identities are, being able to bring your whole self into a space and not have policies keeping you from accessing those spaces is at the essence of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. Brian, thank you for that. The Color of Law is an amazing book about understanding the history of redlining and the effects today. So we're going to move into social identities, and we think about who we are and how we show up in spaces. Social identity theory comes from Henley Tefel. He's a person, he states a person's sense of who they are based on their group memberships, right? And there's a number of ways in which we can identify. Oftentimes we're born into these identity groups. Sometimes folks push these identities onto us. But we have to remember we have multiple identities. They intersect. For me, I'm a mom, I'm a woman of color, I'm a CEO, I'm a student, I'm a daughter, right? And all these things are going on at all times. And sometimes these identities are salient and sometimes they can change between time and context, right? I wasn't always thinking about being a mom or a caregiver, right? Those things change, and how I show up and how I make decisions are informed by making sure that there's family safety. And how I spend my dollars, right? When you have to, the price of eggs. Let me just stop there. The price of eggs. How you spend, how you shop, what you have access to is all important. So if you think of us, and I'm sure many of us have seen the iceberg used in many ways, but it also correlates to DEI. There are things that you can see, we can see each other on the screen that are above the waterline. You can make some assumptions about who or how someone identifies. You should never make assumptions, it's not helpful, but there are some things that you can see, right? And then there's things under the waterline that we can't see. And when we make those assumptions, we fail to understand what is under that waterline. So what are those things, right? You may be able to see my skin color, my gender, race, age. You can see some of those things, but there are a lot of things under the waterline that are not visible. Your value systems, your life experiences, your orientation, your work style, your perspectives, your talents. Those are things that are all at play, and that's what makes us whole individuals. And being able to understand our political views shape policy and law. Those same views show up in our workspaces. And what are we doing to mitigate those biases? So I do want you to take some time, and we're going to do this as a breakout. It'll be about a 7-minute breakout. And you're going to answer the questions: which social identities are most central to how you see yourself as a person? And which social identities have the biggest impact on how others treat you? So if we can kind of focus on those two questions, right? The assumption is that they maybe change in the different spaces, but if you can think about your identities, maybe it's your first language, your national origin, your age, whatever that identity is, please choose one that you're comfortable with sharing, and just talk about how you see yourself and how people treat you based on that particular identity. How do you perceive your treatment? Again, that'll be about 7 minutes. I'm going to drop these questions in the chat for you. If you all can take a little time and be mindful of how much you share, but what are some of those identities, and how do they show up for you? 7 minutes, and Stephanie, go ahead and put them in the breakout.
Start the recording. And just a friendly reminder, if you are wanting to hear this presentation in Spanish, please click the globe and choose your language, Spanish. And Sylvia?
Yes. Oh, Carmen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Carmen.
Ok. Sí, si pueden elegir su idioma, por favor, de nuevo, porque cuando salen al cuarto de discusión y regresan, no se establece de nuevo. Also, if you're not bilingual, just in case we have a Spanish speaker that speaks, you'd have to select the English channel to be able to hear the interpretation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. All yours, Danielle.
Thank you both. Okay, so again, not a lot of time. If I can hear just from one person on what you talked about. So one brief report out.
I think in my group, we identified as certain situations change in our lives. So we kind of get lost of who we are now. Your identity changes, but it could, it's every change is like a good thing. Every lens is something different. Rather than feel like you maybe failed at something, it's really a growth thing.
Right, I love that.
Sometimes it's hard to the change is hard because you identified yourself as something else and now you're totally something different.
Right.
Yeah.
And leaving that space for that change, right? That's what's hard about boxes. Putting someone in a box doesn't give them the opportunity to ebb and flow in identity. Okay, thank you. And again, I hope you all had the opportunity to engage and maybe see your identities paralleled in someone else in your group. Now we're going to get into microaggressions and dive right into that topic. This back end is going to be less interactive, so please feel free to stop me if you have questions, but we're gonna kind of run here a little bit into a couple of topics. Recognizing microaggressions. We've all experienced them, probably have said them, used them. That oftentimes comes up in a lot of human resource departments. How do you deal with just the things that people say or do, the intentions behind those things? Microaggressions are those unintended discriminations towards generally socially marginalized groups, maybe such as racial minorities, sexual minorities, religious minorities, what have you. But anyone can, in fact, experience a microaggression. They're usually more covertly implied. They repeat or affirm stereotypes and oftentimes position the dominant or majority culture as the norm or normal and the minority culture as unusual. Dismissal or insults that limits a person's value or self-worth. Again, I like to think that most folks are caring and kind, and sometimes you just say the wrong thing unintentionally. Generally, that's how things work, but there are folks that have the malice, that take it that one step further. Maybe they are truly, in fact, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, all the isms and obias that are out there. There are folks that do lean in to those particular mindsets and thought processes, but oftentimes we just don't know what we don't know. So being mindful of the things that you say. There's some examples here. If you all want to put some things in the chat from your own experiences, or maybe something that you have said. We don't have the capacity to hear everything, but here are some things, maybe these resonate with you. Assuming that the older employee may not be as good at technology as someone younger on the job. Oftentimes people look to me to do some of the technology stuff, and nope, not that great at it myself. So bad assumption on your part that I'm going to be the one that's going to set up your computer for you. It won't be me. Men mistaking a man for a company CEO when the female CEO is standing right next to them. Ooh, where are you really from? Yes, that level of otherness, that you're also not a part of this nation, this community. Someone telling their Latina colleague that they're so impressed with their English, or, oh, you're so articulate in your speech. And there are some folks that may truly be curious about that. And there are other folks that are trying to other you. Is that your hair? Absolutely, right? And again, folks might not be trying to be malice, but on the receiving end, it doesn't feel good regardless. Intent versus impact, and how that impacts the person that you're working with. You look exotic. People asking me, what do Black people this of XYZ? I get it. What do Black people this of XYZ? Okay. So we're grounded in what a microaggression is, and hopefully you're also thinking about some of the things that you have said that are microaggressive, right? So how do you respond to those things? And this might seem simplistic, but it really isn't that simple when we're not having basic dialogue with one another anymore. We are forgetting to have the art of discussion. So with the microaggression, it's really important for you to pause and make sure what you heard is what they said. Oftentimes it's important to repeat what you believe you heard. And that might look like, I think what you said was, my English is perfect for a Latina. Is that correct? Or, I'm pretty for a Black girl. Is that what you said? And can you elaborate on what you meant by that? You're putting the question back in the corner of the person that said the comment, right? Tell me more. Help me unpack what you're saying. You also need to make sure that you're in a place and space to have that conversation, because you may have been so impacted by what was said that you cannot have that discussion in a way that is going to be fruitful. In that time and space, you might just come back to it. If you're on the job and you're continuing to deal with this, right, you might escalate to a manager, to your HR, to a supervisor, as folks want to be able to safely navigate the systems that they're in. But it's always important to go person to person first and simply ask the question. Let's say you overhear a microaggression being said. How do you engage and maybe have some humanity in your conversation? If you're overhearing something and you feel like you want to step in, and this is just an example, I overheard you make the comment that all people with disabilities need help. I used to think that too, but then I learned disabilities can be both visible and invisible, and we should be open to helping when asked, right? So talking about maybe some of your misconceptions. We all have misconceptions, right? Even minorities have to work to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes we forget that conversation, that we're not always all knowing and all educated. We may be most educated in our culture and our walk, but we might not be educated in the culture and walk of someone else's. So what are we doing to ensure that we're meeting people where they're at and having a humane conversation? How do we address our own microaggressions? Because like I said, I'm in DEI, I am a practitioner, and sometimes I foul up. And it's important for me to be understanding of that, right? Neurodiverse, absolutely. So inviting folks to have the dialogue, right? I feel you had a strong reaction to what I just said. Can you help me understand what just happened? And it's not on the person that you have impacted to teach or educate you, but it's important for you to share, hey, I did mess up. I'm happy to learn more, but can you please tell me, what did I say that was offensive? And I'm going to go do my research and understand why. So get that understanding for yourself and have the vulnerability and the understanding to engage with the person that's most impacted, because they may not want to educate you and they may not want to talk to you about it. So some other things to consider. Thank you for letting me know how my comment made you feel. No one has ever brought this to my attention before. If you're willing to talk to me more about it, I'd like to better understand the ways my comment was problematic so I can learn and also help to educate others, right? An apology for apology's sake goes nowhere. It's the changed behavior that is going to help you move forward. And understanding your intention, right? Intention versus impact. You may have not intended for something to be hurtful, but acknowledging that what you said was impactful to them goes a long way. So again, just kind of reflect on the thought of microaggressions, how it shows up in your place and space. And it can be through your words. When we're on a Zoom screen, because our world has since moved to hybrid, what you have in your background, pay attention to the photos of the things that's displayed. Some folks have some offensive things in their background or on their clothes or on their shirts. How are you showing up in spaces? And again, we all have freedom of speech, but we also have consequences to our speech, what we wear, what we say. We're going to slide into privilege and oppression. Privilege is when you think something is not a problem because it's not a problem to you personally. And privilege has become a very loaded word. In this space, we'll again do common language, privilege being a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group of people. Oppression being the state of being subject to unjust treatment or control. I believe that we all can experience both privilege and oppression and or display both of those things. Oftentimes we see privilege show up in identity-based privilege. So when people hear they belong to a privileged group or benefit from something like race privilege, gender privilege, they don't get it or they feel angry and defensive about being questioned about that privilege, right? People commonly say, I don't get things easier than others. I've worked really hard. If others would just work as hard as I would to get to the same place. This flies in the face of equity, right? If we don't understand our own privileges and understand how they show up, we're flying against equity because we understand that not everyone starts at the same place. Going back to history, that GI Bill family that was set up generationally was able to pass down some wealth potentially. That's not to say that you can't lose wealth, but when you start at a space on the track that's ahead and others have not accessed that same ability, they're going to be behind, and those generations are going to be even further behind than the person that was able to get the money, the opportunity, the dollars, whatever that may be. So again, thinking about privilege not as such a loaded word, but let's look at it as handedness. We have about 130 some odd folks on the screen. And so how many of you are left-handed? We probably have a good minority group here. We would say that the majority of folks on the screen are right-handed. Left-handed folks are in the minority as it pertains to handedness. And when you think about your experience, how many of you were forced to use your right hand? How often did you have to find the appropriate desk? Where did you have to go to get your scissors, right? The world was not made for you. The world is made for the majority, right-handed folks. Simple as that. So if you're right-handed, it's plug and play. You sit down at your desk, you use your writing utensil, boom, you're good to go. That's a preference to a majority culture. So understanding the handedness conversation now move that to race, ethnicity, move that to gender, move that to ability, disability, move that to neurodiversity. And you'll see how can you have access at the same rate as the person sitting next to you. I see Sherry put, was whooped on my left hand in a private school to be made to use my right hand. There are no shortage of those types of stories. And if we go even earlier in our history, left-handed folks were believed to be evil spirits, demons. Look this history up. I'm not making it up, right? If this is happening in handedness, left or right-handedness, how does it show up in culture? And how does that keep us from being able to move forward? I want you, again, let's be reflective. How might your experience as a professional wage earner differ from the experience of someone who is unemployed in responding to school requests for supplies for your children? Responding to an acquaintance who might want to go to lunch? Answering a want ad job that's 60 miles away? How might your experience as an able-bodied person differ from the experience of a person with a disability? In commuting to work every day, negotiating maybe where your annual dinner or events are being held, how people interpret an expression of anger or frustration, right? When we think about some of the cognitive disabilities, people on the spectrum, it's important for us to understand who we're working with and why someone may be saying something. Right? If you have, or if you're autistic, or I've worked with someone that is autistic, there's some things that you have to know and understand when working with varying levels of ability and disability. How are you preparing yourself in your workplace for the people that you're going to encounter and work alongside? Power and privilege can play out in our group dynamics in destructive ways. We must challenge supremacist practices that marginalize and exclude and dehumanize people. How are we looking at power? How are we looking at privilege? Oftentimes when I'm in a space, I find it important that if I'm the only one in the room, depending on that facet of diversity, I'm holding the door open to bring 4 or 5 other people in that space. So that when I leave that space, the representation is still there, right? So you can't be the gatekeeper to access either, right? If you're the only one, how are you working to ensure that other people have access? So now we are at action steps. My hope is that you've gotten some tangible things throughout, but here are some other pieces for you to consider as you're doing the work in your spaces. Counteract and know your culture. We all have a culture, be it in your community, in your workspaces, your places of worship, whatever that is. What is the culture? And then you have to take time to deconstruct and relearn. We have some learned stereotypes that we run with, that we believe that them to be innately true, and they may not be. So how are we working to engage those communities and understanding the cultural values of the communities that we work with? Review your policies and procedures. When were the last time they were updated? Those things are what hold people out of being able to join your organizations. What really truly needs to be in your policy? Does the person need a PhD to do the job, or can you teach them the skill? So thinking about those ways practically, audit your print, marketing, and website material. Be aware of your cultural norms in your organizations, the communities you work with. You don't know everything. Take the time to learn, right? Learn the languages. Maybe it's pronouns. Maybe you have someone on the job that identifies as they, them. We're not talking about your personal values. We're talking about respecting the way someone identifies. My name is Danielle. I want to be called Danielle. Don't call me Danny. That's just being respectful. I'm not telling you to change your value. I'm asking you to refer to me in the way I want to be referred to, because I will do the same for you. Understanding people first language. Set your expectation. EDI starts at the recruitment, and the efforts are showcased in your tracked retention. Before you go seeking diversity, or before you go filling your facets, are you prepared? Again, policies, procedures, what's the culture say? You might want someone that's bilingual in your space, but how do the people feel about folks that are bilingual, right? You have to check the temperature and understand who you have on the job. And sometimes it might be realizing that you have some problematic folks in your culture, and that's why you can't keep the diversity in your space, whatever that diversity facet may be. Embed those practices in your interview. If you believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a value and it's a part of your culture, some of those questions should show up in your interview. How do you feel about working with diverse communities? Look at it starts at hiring. Who are you bringing on? Are you wanting to be reflective of your community? Look at your census data, and you can look at the numbers in your county, in your municipality, in your state. You can see the diversity that's, for the most part, represented within your community. What are those metrics when you're looking to recruit? And then benefits, flexible time, professional development, affinity groups, mentoring. Maybe you have to have a Black professionals group, or a LGBTQ plus pride group, or whatever that may be. Some folks just need to have the ability to belong, right? If you spend your life in a majority culture and you never see yourself, what are opportunities to create some of those groups on the job? Employee resource groups, business resource groups, whatever those things make sense in your culture. And then cultural humility, some common language here, a process that requires humility. Each has something of great value to learn from the other, as individuals continually engage in self-reflection and self-critique as a lifelong learner and reflective practitioner. How do we redress power imbalances to develop mutually beneficial non-paternalistic partnerships in care? What are those three kind of things for us to consider? A lifelong commitment to learning and critical self-reflection, right? If you learn and know about yourself, you'll be more open to learning and knowing about others. The desire to fix imbalances, being mindful of your client dynamics, your constituent dynamics, whatever the consumer or person that you're working with, and then your institutional accountability and mutual respectful partnerships based on trust. Cultural humility, and I like to lean into cultural humility versus competency, because there's a lot of cultures out there for you to be competent or try to have a competency. But if you have humility, the ability to continue to learn and educate yourself, you'll be able to go a long way. So as we continue to reflect in these last 5 minutes, I want you to consider, how will this session inform your work? Again, this is just a 101. I threw a lot at you. I hope to see you all at the other session so we can dig a little bit deeper. But from what you've learned today, how will this inform your work? What are you committed to doing to impact change with what you've been introduced to, learned, or how are you going to continue to hone the work that you've been introduced to? And what are you going to do to succeed in that commitment? Again, I'll follow up with some slides for you to write down and jot down what that commitment is. And I would say in the next 3 months, check in to see where you are with this work. 6 months, a year, and just continue to dig into the work. Like anything, if you want to be a DEI practitioner, you have to do the reading. So books, resources. There's a couple of books. This is certainly not a comprehensive list, but some books for you to consider. It's never too early to start to understand and educate yourself, right? Representation is important in what we teach and how we engage. So some books for the younger generation so they can understand who they are and the world that they're interacting with. EEOC, if you're looking for the government policy, if you're looking for the laws that, and not the spirit, but the law of DEI, take some time to go into those spaces to learn more what does it mean to be an employer that can employ those with varying disabilities, the software and the things that you need to be able to be successful, and everyone being able to do the job when they're hired. And then if you have additional questions for me, this is my contact information. I have other folks that do DEI trainings as well. I am in Wichita, Kansas. A few folks have reached out. We would love to come out, but Zoom is super easy. So feel free to book with IGS on some Zoom things. Thank you for your time. Tracy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you
to the minute.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And even, we've had Danielle before. This is her second go around, and I learned something new today. So if we could give her either a virtual or an actual round of applause, just wanted to say, thank you so much. And I'm just going to take 1 more minute of your time. If you could just give over the screen to me, and we will close this out.
Yep. Sorry about
that. No worries. And I know a lot of people were asking about the slides. So Danielle did say that we will be sharing these slides. So no worries about that. So just real quick to round it up, the next session, we're going to be the every other Friday, going from today to I believe February, March, April, through April. So it'll be every other Friday, and you'll be getting emails from me. So you'll get an email a week out, a day out, and the day usually about an hour before. So you don't need to really write anything down. You'll be tired of seeing me in your inbox. And so the next is going to be Friday, February 17th. It's a good one. This is implicit bias. So that is a great one to note, that if you're wanting to attend one of the sessions, this is a great one to attend. And then finally, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I know it's a Friday. Everybody's winding down from the week, but I think this was time well spent. Danielle, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for spending your Friday morning with us. We'll see you in 2 weeks. So take care and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you for having it. Very good session.
Thank you, Doctor.
You can call me Cheryl.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a great weekend, everyone. And Linda, I sent you information if you're still here, Linda Coleman.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.